dollar supremacy, dollar primacy. Yanis Varoufakis has this short video. It's like 7 minutes, and he was the Greek finance minister during the like Eurozone crisis in the Obama years. And like for a lot of people, that's probably like, you know, you never heard of it or it's memory hold or something. So he issues this 7-minute video just yesterday about Trump's tariffs and the contradiction that's inherent with dollar primacy, dollar supremacy, dollar hegemony, whatever you want to call it, right? The fact that the dollar is the backstop reserve currency for most of the world's financial transactions, that affords the United States unique ability to finance military primacy, right? It's like a necessary condition of military primacy, which is on the wane anyway. But it's also like dollar supremacy gives America a unique degree of sanctioning power. So the overuse of sanctions owes also to dollar supremacy, you know. But he has this fantastic kind of tutorial rant, I don't know what you want to call it.
Donald Trump, the American dollar, and China. What to watch for during 2025. Donald Trump wants to boost exports, to bring American jobs back to the United States, and to shrink the American trade deficit. For that, he needs a lower value of the dollar. For that, he needs a weaker dollar. But at the same time, Donald Trump wants a strong dollar, and he will not brook any discussion of ending the exorbitant privilege, the centrality, the hegemony, the dominance of the American dollar in international transactions. Can Donald Trump...
So I'll stop this intermittently, as I always do, to ad-lib, but that's the crucial point, and it's the point from which we might be able to agitate and do important things here. So there's an inherent contradiction in what Trump wants, what he's trying to do, right? He needs a weak dollar. He must have a weak dollar in order to increase U.S. exports relative to U.S. imports. If the dollar primacy necessitates a trade imbalance, it makes a trade imbalance inevitable. And as we know, the thing that Trump is most obsessed with in policy is trade deficits, trade imbalances, right? So dollar primacy and getting rid of dollar primacy in favor of either a different reserve currency or dollar multilateralism or a fake super note that the IMF creates, you know, a new currency or something. All of those things are like possible, but not super likely, at least not in the immediate term. But the going toward that is what will help get Trump what he seeks, which is a trade balance, right? But he has also said, let me see if I can share this other screen instead. So this is what Trump shared like a week ago on the various social media, right? This statement, the idea that the BRICS countries are trying to move away from the dollar while we stand by and watch is over. We require a commitment from these countries that they will never create they will neither create a new BRICS currency nor back any other currency to replace the mighty U.S. dollar. This is a fool's errand. I wrote about this in the Undiplomatic newsletter maybe like 2 weeks ago, so you can check that out if you want. But the point is that he wants the dollar to be strong, and yet a strong dollar causes the very thing that he doesn't want, which is trade deficits, trade imbalances, right? So let's keep going with Yanis.
Donald Trump's first problem is that the tariffs that he has invested so much political capital in introducing, announcing, and advocating for will most likely boost the value of the dollar. Why? Primarily because every time there is global uncertainty, whenever there is a problem that emanates from the United States, whether that was the 2008 crisis or whatever crisis there is a paradoxical rush of foreign money into the United States, boosting the dollar. So if Trump's tariffs create global uncertainty, the likely outcome will be an increased value of the dollar. And that's his first problem, because if his tariffs succeed in creating a lot of consternation across the world, in China, in the European Union, in Britain. The result will be that even if imports initially shrink as a result of these large tariffs, the influx of money into the United States of capital is going to boost the value of the dollar, therefore countering whatever effects the tariffs had on limiting imports and enhancing American exports. Donald Trump's second problem is that if he proceeds with his very large tax cuts, especially for corporations and the oligarchs and the very rich in the United States, this is also going to attract into the United States foreign capital. And what will that do? Boost the value of the dollar, and therefore enhance the gap between American savings and investment, with investment being much greater than savings, which is a root cause of the American trade deficit. Trump's third problem.
Okay. Trump may not be interested in political economy, but political economy is interested in Trump. It doesn't matter necessarily what Trump's intentions are. There's a cause and effect as he brings his nonsense into contact with reality. And so when the world goes a little fucking crazy or seems uncertain or volatile, the safe place to park your money, especially if you're like a foreign oligarch or a foreign government, is in the US. So unless America stops the ability, which would destroy the financial world, stops the ability for foreign money to come into America, that would never happen. What's going to happen as a result of Trump's tariff stuff is more money coming in, more foreign money coming into America, buying up US dollars, and therefore strengthening the US dollar. And a strong US dollar kind of hurts American workers. It definitely hurts American exporters, right? Which really is the heartland, like American agriculture, you know? All right, let's keep going.
Every time there is a crisis, especially one emanating from within the United States, the dollar goes up and the US trade deficit gets worse, especially during periods of reduced demand, jobs and employment within the United States. So if Donald Trump were serious about shrinking the American trade deficit, he would want to do away with the exorbitant privilege of the United States dollar. But of course, not only will he never allow himself to do that, because his best friends, his tribe, are the rentiers and the financiers, who will be aghast if the United States loses the exorbitant privilege of its dollar.
So just quickly, this is a key thing too, like Trump doesn't just want dollar primacy because it sounds strong. He doesn't just want a strong dollar because it's got the word strong in it. He wants a strong dollar because the people around him are billionaires and oligarchs, and they're Wall Street money people. And those people benefit most from a strong dollar, right? If you're on the finance side of the economy, you benefit from a strong dollar. If you're on the production and export side of the economy, you benefit from a weak dollar. So it's all about who's picking the winners and losers. And a strong dollar picks Wall Street. It picks, oligarchs to a large extent. And so and the national security state, which benefits from a strong dollar because it enhances their ability to impose sanctions on others. But also it is how we finance military primacy, right? Let's keep going.
It is highly unlikely that Donald Trump will want to be the first American president after the Second World War that loses the hegemonic power of the United States by losing the exorbitant privilege of the United States dollar. Some argue, and I think they do have a point, that maybe what Donald Trump is trying to do, is he is threatening the world, China and the European Union in particular, with very large tariffs in order to come to an arrangement with them to accept a depreciation of the Chinese yuan, of the euro, of competing currencies, in order for the United States to see its exports rise and its imports.
So if you're thinking that Trump is playing 3D chess, which is probably not the case, there is a possibility here where you could impose a 3D chess lens on all this and say that like all the threats of tariffs and bluster and all this stuff, It's just to get China and other countries to strengthen their currencies, right? And America did this to Japan in 1985. It's called the Plaza Accords. The U.S. basically told Japan, it was a multilateral set of finance meetings, but the U.S. told fucking Japan it needed to strengthen the yen relative to the dollar. And if it didn't, the U.S. was going to impose sanctions, tariffs on things like, Toyota export, cars and shit. And so in American foreign policy history, this is narrated incorrectly. People have an incorrect understanding of it. America coerced Japan through the Plaza Accords to strengthen the yen. That directly suffocated Japan's economy. It was an export-based economy, and it reduced its ability to export. And so starting in 1990, a couple years later, Japan's economy went into basically the stagflation, permanent recession. So Japan stopped being this dynamic innovator country that it was known for being in the 70s and the 80s because we killed it. We killed it. And the Japanese government went along with it because they were a U.S. client state, an ally. Japan took it in the fucking ass, And this is either misremembered or not known at all among foreign policy aficionados. And that is fucking embarrassing for the foreign policy aficionados, because this is a fundamental aspect of our current reality, including in Asia.
Diminish. To cut a deal, in other words, something along the lines of what Ronald Reagan did in 1985. The infamous Plaza Accords, supposedly a multilateral meeting between the Europeans, the Americans, the Canadians, the Australians. But in reality, what the Plaza Accords were about was an ultimatum by Washington on Tokyo. Appreciate the yen massively, or else I'm going to slap large tariffs on Japanese exports. The Japanese are rolled over. They did as they were told. The reason why Japan's massive growth rates between 1950 and 1985 were eliminated, and why Japan lost its verve, its dynamism, was because they accepted those Plaza Accords. Is China?
So do you get this? U.S. primacy, one of the reasons I date U.S. primacy to before the unipolar moment started, the U.S., in the name of defending American primacy, the growth of Japan's economy was too much. So we found this very clever way to kneecap our client state, whom we militarily occupy, albeit consensually. They want us, the government wants us there, So we use a basic truth about world politics is that it's easier to coerce allies than it is enemies. It has almost always been that way. Enemies rarely do what you want when you threaten them. But if you threaten a fucking ally, they often do what you want. Not always, but it's easier. It's easier to deal with them, and you've got those personal relationships. And in fact, I talk about this in Pacific Power, my third book, Pacific Power Paradox, right? The chapter on the Reagan years talks about this. The U.S., the Reagan administration was kind of obsessed with the threat of the yellow peril, Japanese economic hegemony or whatever, and they wanted to move to stop it. And one of the reasons why Republicans in the 80s wanted to keep the U.S. military presence in Japan, literally George Shultz, Reagan's Secretary of State, I quote him in the fucking book. He says it's because they want to keep an eye on Japan. And the region doesn't trust Japan or whatever. They're afraid of Japanese militarism. And so Reagan was obsessed, not Reagan, Reagan's people were obsessed with the threat of Japanese economic hegemony. They wanted America to remain on top. And they wanted to make sure that Japan remained dependent on the U.S. And so that's the context of the Plaza Accords, And in the Reagan years, Congress was all about tariffs, and people forget that because Reagan used to use a lot of free trade rhetoric. The Reagan administration used tariffs like crazy and Section 301 investigations like crazy.
Likely to accept a new Plaza Accords. I assign a 0 probability to that possibility. China is not Japan.
So he was saying there is 0 chance that China is going to sign up to a new Plaza Accords. If you remember, Trump is obsessed with the fucking 80s. He's obsessed with Nakatomi Plaza. He still has this 1980s view of Japan, you know? He thinks he's fucking John McClane or whatever. And so he, in his mind, he and Peter Navarro and some of these guys, they would love nothing more than to set up a new Plaza Accord. And that is, the Plaza Accords is something that is like looms large in their imagination. In the MAGA, NatCon, 1980s fetish imagination, the Plaza Accords is a thing they would like to like replicate. But that was a unique circumstance. And it was not, first of all, it was not fair that we did that to Japan. That's pretty fucked up. And we've never really had to pay a price for that. And I feel like Japan should probably be more pissed about that. But also, China's not going to do that. They're not a fucking client state of the US. They're a great power rival, you know? And we've gone out of our way to make them an enemy. Your enemy is not as coercible as your friend. Straight up, right? Okay, let's finish.
Japan was an occupied country by the United States. The United States wrote its constitution. There are tens of thousands of American soldiers still occupying Okinawa. China, I will repeat this once more, is not Japan. It is highly unlikely that they will accept, at a time when the capital account of China, if anything, would recommend from an economic point of view a depreciation of the yuan. They will never accept a massive appreciation of the kind that would make the difference for the United States trade deficit in the way that Donald Trump would like. So this is pie in the sky. No new Plaza Accords between the United States and Beijing this time are on the horizon. Very unlikely that what Donald Trump wants, at least both his objectives of shrinking the US trade deficit and maintaining the exorbitant privilege of the dollar, that both these objectives will be satisfied at once in 2025, in the next 4 years. The great question, however, for 2025 and beyond concerns China's dilemma. Will Beijing decide to stay put, gaining time until the United States' internal contradictions, Trump's conundrum and dilemma, plays out? Or will Beijing make the choice, which it has not made yet? They have not made up their minds yet, and I think reasonably, will, however, at some point make the choice, make the decision to convert the BRICS area into a new version of Bretton Woods. Just as Bretton Woods had at its heart the US dollar, for the BRICS area to have the yuan at its heart, with more or less fixed exchange rates between the yuan, the rupiah, and other currencies, and with a view to recycle China's surpluses within the BRICS area, because that would be the greatest and most lethal danger for the exorbitant privilege of the dollar. This is not a decision that has been made as yet.
So one of the realities, I've been on this shit for a long time, one of the realities of dollar primacy is that it cannot last, it will not last, and the question is, over what time span is it going to erode? And like already, the US is the reserve currency for, I think, 58% of global transactions. That's barely more than half. That's more than other alternative currencies. But that means like almost half of global transactions are not denominated in US dollars. So primacy is like much more sort of thinner and more tenuous than I think like conventional American narratives would suggest, you know? And so that's important to keep in mind, because this shit ain't gonna last forever. And the real most conceivable threat I think threat is not the right language, but alternative, accelerant, if you will, of the decline of dollar supremacy is this notion of like either a BRICS alternative currency, which seems very unlikely. BRICS being Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and then Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand are actually becoming part of the BRICS as well. It's a growing block. Like the difference between the BRICS and the global South, or what used to be known as the Third World, is diminishing. Like the BRICS is quickly expanding into being simply a euphemism for the global South, or for the new Third World, or whatever, right? So the BRICS, if it develops its own currency, which is something that has not been decided, but that people talk about, it's very unlikely, but that would be the end of dollar supremacy, because the BRICS nations already constitute 40% of the world's population, and that grows as the number of BRICS members grows. It's not super likely, but what Yanis was saying at the end there about China recycling its surpluses within a BRICS ecosystem, like the idea of a Bretton Woods-like system, but for the global South, that would create a kind of like South-South interdependence that doesn't have a firewall from the West, but that would make them largely independent of the West, but more dependent on each other. And that would be a brave new world that would function as a world radically different than the world that we know right now. And I think Washington can't even wrap its mind around that possibility. And if China's surpluses, like when China benefits from trade imbalances, and then it captures surpluses, it captures excess capital, like its capital accounts grow. When it starts to put that money into circulation, if it puts it into circulation only within BRICS countries, or primarily within BRICS countries, that actually will benefit most of the world, but it will start slowly to come at the expense of Western nations, and specifically America. Now, this is not an alternative future that China is describing, that China is pursuing. Nobody is trying to make that happen right now, but it's conceivable that it could happen. It's logical, and it's the most likely alternative to a world of dollar primacy. The way that alternative world of sort of a Sino-centric, multipolar, global South, BRICS community, whatever you want to call it, that alternative world is most likely when America imposes 100% tariffs on everybody in order to punish them, in order to sanction everybody. The use of dollar primacy to defend dollar primacy is the end of dollar primacy. He wants reduced trade deficits, but he wants a strong dollar. Those two things don't go together. And so by trying to make them go together, he's going to end up accelerating dollar decline, probably. A global South that is financially more stable, and that is allowed to develop economically, that has a growth pathway, that shit is gonna fucking, like, that's gonna be good for the world. That's gonna be good for the US. One of the contradictions of like Bidenomics, like the contradiction of like Trumponomics or whatever, is that by the US choosing policies that gives no development ladder to the global South is perpetually in like fiscal crisis, debt distress, austerity imposed by the IMF. They have no fucking ability to grow. If they don't grow, they don't have markets to invest in, and therefore American and Western capital is missing out on a huge section of the world. Take for example American exporters. If you're on this like manufacturing fetish shit, which I'm not, if manufacturing is going to be profitable, it's going to have to export. It's going to have foreign markets. But how are American manufacturers going to have foreign markets if the rest of the world is impoverished because of crises of debt and sustainability and fiscal and currency crises and shit? We don't even care about it. We say, fuck you, or we impose ginormous tariffs on them that reduces their exports to the US and therefore tanks their economy. If we do a Plaza Accords with the rest of the world, which we can't, but if we did, as we wish, to dominate, it would destroy their ability to buy things. And then we can't export to them. There's an inherent fucking contradiction there.